What if the moment you stopped caring was the moment they finally started? What if the very thing that drove you to let go was the exact thing that pulled them back? Stay with me, because what I am about to share will completely change the way you see every avoidant relationship you have ever been in. Most people think walking away is the end. But for the avoidant, your silence is the beginning of their panic. And here is what nobody tells you. When they come back, it is not love. It is not growth. It is not the breakthrough you have been waiting for. It is the final trick, the most dangerous one. And if you do not understand what is really happening beneath the surface of their return, you will fall right back into the same cycle all over again. So watch this all the way through, because the truth is not what you expect. They say the most dangerous silence is not the one you hear. It is the one that rings out after you finally stop caring. When the emotional tide that once pulled you toward the avoidant begins to calm, something profound shifts inside the connection. The balance that once quietly defined your bond starts to change. For a long time, the avoidant found a deep sense of comfort in knowing that your attention circled around them like a constant orbit. Your presence, even when it arrived wrapped in your own pain, confirmed their sense of control over the relationship. It was never that they consciously chose to cause harm. Rather, your emotional investment became the invisible net that kept them shielded from the raw terror of their own inner fears. But the moment you begin to pull that energy back, when you no longer react, no longer reach out, no longer feed the familiar dynamic between you, something inside the avoidant collapses. And that collapse is not about losing you as a person. It is about losing the emotional structure that made their world feel predictable and safe. Avoidants crave distance. That part most people understand. But here is what most people miss. They quietly build their entire identity around the certainty that someone is still waiting at the edges of that distance. When that waiting stops, their internal system goes into a kind of panic. They experience a deeply disorienting form of loss, not because love has vanished from their heart, but because control has. Emotional control is their silent language. It is the only way they have ever known how to feel safe without being fully exposed to another person. So when you genuinely detach, it is as if you have rewritten the invisible rules of their world. The dynamic they depended on stops making sense to them. They once believed your care was endless, that your hope could never be broken, that your patience was proof of their value. When all of that stops, it feels to them like a mirror has shattered, the mirror that once reflected their worth through your eyes. And in that shattering, they begin to ask themselves a terrifying question. What remains of me when no one is holding the mirror anymore? This is exactly when the final subtle trick begins to appear. And if you are not careful, if you are not watching closely, you will miss it entirely. The avoidant will often move to reclaim that lost emotional balance, but not through genuine love and not through real connection. They do it through reversal. They flip the emotional polarity that once kept them comfortable. Suddenly, the one who seemed unreachable begins to appear again. The one who pulled away starts to show small traces of interest. They might send a message that feels like it offers closure, but underneath it is carefully designed to reopen the wound you have been working so hard to heal. It is not real affection driving this. It is a deep need to restore the old familiar order. They cannot stand being the one who feels unseen. They need to know that they still carry emotional gravity in your life. By testing whether you will respond, they are really measuring whether they still matter to your inner world. They might act indifferent on the surface while quietly pulling your attention back underneath. They might bring up shared memories that stir your emotions, or hint at regret without ever truly offering the healing you actually deserve. This is the painful paradox of their behavior. When you cared deeply, they pushed you away. When you stopped, they moved towards you, but not to love you, only to make sure they are not forgotten. Their need for emotional validation runs so deep it operates almost entirely beneath their awareness. They do not sit down and consciously decide to manipulate. Instead, every action they take is driven by the primal fear of losing the psychological safety your caring once gave them freely. They do not yet understand that real safety has nothing to do with control. It lives only in true vulnerability, and because they do not understand this, they hold tightly to the only thing they know. Power through distance, security through keeping the emotional scales unbalanced. This final move can be the most confusing and disorienting experience you will face in the whole journey of detaching from an avoidant person. You may start to wonder if they have genuinely changed. You may ask yourself if they are finally feeling what they once seemed incapable of feeling. But what is truly happening is a reflexive and unconscious attempt to restore familiarity. The connection between you was always a dance, a cycle of pursuit and withdrawal, of giving and withholding, of hoping and being disappointed. And when you step out of that dance completely, the avoidant becomes unmoored. The silence they once used as a weapon against you now feels to them like being abandoned. Stay with me here because this next part is crucial. When the avoidant senses that your energy has genuinely shifted, that the air between you no longer carries the same emotional charge it once did, something stirs deep inside them. For so long, they hid behind thick walls of detachment and projected an image of confidence in their solitude. Yet the moment you truly stop reaching, stop chasing, stop hoping, they begin to feel an ache they do not recognize. And here is the part that will sting if you are not prepared for it. It is not love in the way you have been longing for. It is fear wearing the costume of longing. The avoidant's final trick often arrives disguised as sudden softness, a display of vulnerability so unexpected, so perfectly timed that it catches you completely off guard. They might reach out with words that sound sincere and honest for the first time, gestures that seem to hint at genuine regret, memories shared in a way that tugs directly at the deepest part of your heart. It feels in that moment as though they have finally seen your worth, as if the cold and distant mask has melted away at last. But beneath that apparent warmth lies something far more complex and far less romantic than what you are hoping to find. It is a defense mechanism born entirely from panic. When you withdraw your care, you remove the mirror that reflected their image back to them. Avoidants often carry an inner emptiness they cannot fully name or understand. Your love, even when they rejected it repeatedly, served as evidence that they existed meaningfully in someone else's emotional world. Your attention confirmed their value. Your persistence, your willingness to keep trying, shielded them from having to face their deepest fear, the terrifying possibility that they are not worthy of love at all. So when you go quiet, when you go still, their subconscious trembles. They begin to ask what is left of them without your reflection illuminating their existence. This is where the illusion of vulnerability begins to take shape. It is not necessarily intentional deception. It is an instinctual reaction to a kind of emotional starvation. They sense that the bond which once quietly validated them is dissolving, and so they return, wrapped in the appearance of vulnerability, not to heal, but to refill the void. You might notice that their words suddenly carry a different weight. They might talk about missing you in ways they never allowed themselves to before, about realizing things they claim they could not see clearly when you were present. They may even admit to fear, to loneliness, to a confusion they cannot explain. And these moments feel profound because they break the familiar pattern of emotional distance that once defined everything between you. But the tragedy hidden inside this moment is real, and it is painful. Their vulnerability often ends precisely where comfort begins. The moment they sense your heart beginning to open again, the moment they feel the warmth of being emotionally seen returning, the fear that drove their apparent softness quietly fades, and their old defenses, the ones you know so well, begin to slip back into place. It is a cycle born from survival, not from cruelty. Their sudden openness is not a real revelation. It is a reflex designed to escape the unbearable pain of invisibility. This is why their timing always feels so cruel. You waited and waited and waited to be truly understood, to be met somewhere in the middle, to witness emotional honesty from someone who seemed emotionally locked away. And then the moment you finally let go, the moment you finally choose yourself, they appear transformed. It creates a disorienting blend of hope and disbelief that is almost impossible to sit with calmly. You start to question everything. Did they truly change? Was your detachment the key all along? Was the answer simply to stop caring? But what is really happening beneath the surface is an internal war between their need for connection and their terror of it. When they feel your absence deeply enough, the fear of abandonment temporarily overrides the fear of true intimacy. It pushes them toward you. It compels them to show pieces of themselves they usually keep carefully buried. But as soon as the connection feels re-established, as soon as the wound of invisibility begins to close, their deeper fear takes control again. The fear that intimacy will consume them, expose them, destroy the carefully constructed self they have spent years protecting. And so, they retreat, again. The cycle repeats itself, not because they are evil, but because they are deeply, profoundly afraid. Here is something important that most people never consider, and I want you to really sit with this. The avoidant does not behave this way because you were not enough. They behave this way because they never learned how to feel safe while being fully seen. Somewhere along the way, long before you ever arrived in their life, they learned that closeness was dangerous, that needing someone left you exposed and vulnerable to being hurt, that love came with conditions, with withdrawal, with pain. And so they built their entire emotional architecture around the idea that keeping distance was the only real form of protection. They became experts at needing no one, at appearing self-sufficient, at making others chase them while they stood just far enough away to never be fully caught. You were not a victim of their personality. You were a mirror that reflected back everything they have spent their whole life running from. And when you finally stopped holding that mirror up, the reflection disappeared, and the quiet that followed was louder than anything they had ever heard. Now let us talk about the guilt, because this is where the final trick becomes truly insidious. When the avoidant realizes that the emotional distance between you is no longer temporary, when they understand that you have made a decision, and that decision is peace, they begin to pull psychological threads that are sewn directly into the fabric of your empathy. They do not come at you with anger or obvious manipulation. They come with something far more effective. They come with carefully placed words that make you question your own growth. Statements that land softly but carry tremendous weight beneath the surface. Things like, "I never thought you would move on this quickly. I thought what we had was something real. I just needed more time." Each sentence is engineered to stir something inside you: regret, second-guessing, a creeping sense of responsibility for everything that went wrong between you. The avoidant almost never confronts their own emotional patterns directly. Instead, they shift the narrative so gradually and so skillfully that you begin to carry the emotional weight of the entire separation on your own shoulders, while they quietly watch the scales tip back in their direction. Their goal is never to heal the relationship. It is to ensure that you still feel tethered to them, even if that tether is made entirely of guilt and confusion. Emotional detachment from you registers to them as rejection. But rather than sitting with that pain honestly and doing the inner work it demands, they project it outward. They make you feel uncertain about your own clearly established boundaries. They rely on your empathy, the very quality they once pushed away, to maintain their significance inside your mind. And here is the painful irony at the heart of all of it. The same sensitivity that once drew you toward them, the same open heart that made you willing to love them patiently and deeply, becomes the exact tool they use to prevent you from fully moving forward. You might begin to notice a very specific pattern in when their messages arrive. It is rarely during your darkest moments. It is almost always during your moments of clarity, when you have started to feel peaceful, when you have begun to genuinely accept the loss and imagine your life without them filling the empty spaces. That is when the message comes. That is when the memory is brought up. That is precisely when they reappear, because your peace is threatening to them in a way your pain never was. Your pain kept you connected. Your peace sets you free. And there is something even deeper happening that most people never see. When the avoidant uses guilt and nostalgia to pull you back, they are not only trying to restore their power over you, they are also trying to silence their own. Think about that for a moment. If they can make you doubt your decision to let go, if they can make you feel partly responsible for the fracture, they can avoid facing the full truth of their own role in destroying something that could have been beautiful. They can tell themselves that both of you contributed equally to the distance. They can soften the reality of their own withdrawal, their own unavailability, their own refusal to show up completely for someone who offered them everything. Shared guilt becomes their absolution. It allows them to maintain emotional distance without ever having to look clearly at the damage that distance caused. The fog they create with their words serves two purposes simultaneously. It keeps you uncertain, and it keeps them comfortable. And as long as both things are true, they never have to grow. But here is what I want you to understand about power. Real power in any relationship is never found in the one who withholds. It is found in the one who is willing to walk away with their heart still intact. When you genuinely detach from the avoidant, when you stop reacting to the silence, when your emotional world begins to revolve around your own healing rather than their approval, the power dynamic does not just shift, it reverses completely. And this reversal is something the avoidant is entirely unprepared for. Their sense of emotional dominance was never about control over the external world. It was internal. It lived in the quiet certainty that no matter how far they retreated, you would still be there. That no matter how much they withheld, you would keep giving. That no matter how cold they became, your warmth would remain available whenever they decided they were ready to receive it. Your constancy was the foundation of their control. And when that constancy disappears, the foundation cracks. In the space created by your withdrawal, the avoidant is forced to confront a mirror they have spent their entire life carefully avoiding. Not the mirror you provided, the one that showed them through your love and your longing, but the mirror within, the one that shows them who they truly are when no one else's devotion is present to soften the reflection. Their old identity, the one built on emotional independence, on being desired but never fully available, on needing no one while quietly needing everyone, begins to lose its shape. And rather than face the collapse of that identity, rather than sit in the discomfort of that confrontation and allow it to transform them, they do the only thing their conditioning allows. They reach for what they know. They try to recreate the dynamic. They attempt to lure you back into the imbalance that feeds their fear by disguising it as reconnection. Mixed signals, small gestures of warmth followed immediately by withdrawal. Moments of contact followed by long, deliberate silence. These are not accidents. They are calculated tests. They need to know if they still have the ability to destabilize your peace, because as long as you are uncertain, they are not powerless. And now, Here is the part that truly matters, the part where everything changes and the cycle either breaks or begins again. When you stand firm in your peace, when you refuse to be pulled back into the emotional chaos by guilt or nostalgia or the illusion of their vulnerability, something remarkable begins to happen. The avoidant is left with no choice but to look inward. Some will resist this with everything they have. They will fill the silence with distractions, new connections, busier routines, anything that keeps them from hearing the echo inside their own emptiness. But the echo does not stop. It gets louder, because it was never about you specifically. It was always about them and the self they have been abandoning for years. Your presence in their life gave them somewhere to escape, a place to deposit their unresolved fears without ever having to examine them. When you leave, that escape route closes, and the inner work that was always waiting for them becomes impossible to postpone any further. The truth that lives at the center of every avoidant dynamic is this: their avoidance of love was always an avoidance of self. The distance they created between the two of you was never really about you. It was always about the distance they could not close within themselves, between the person they show the world and the terrified, unhealed version of themselves that they work so hard to keep hidden. They did not push you away because you were lacking. They pushed you away because your closeness threatened to expose what they lacked. And when you finally stop reaching, when you finally choose your own peace over the exhausting cycle, you do not just end the pattern. You expose it. You hold up the very mirror they feared most, not because you planned to, not because you wanted to hurt them, but because in loving yourself enough to walk away, you showed them exactly what it looks like to face yourself honestly. And that, whether they ever acknowledge it or not, is the greatest gift you could have given them. So if you are sitting with this right now, if something in these words is touching a wound you have been trying to heal, I want you to hear this clearly, and I want you to let it sink all the way in. The guilt you feel for moving on is not evidence that you did something wrong. It is evidence that you loved deeply and fully and without reservation. The confusion you feel when they return is not weakness. It is your nervous system remembering a pattern it learned to survive inside. And the peace you are working toward, the quiet, stable, unshakable peace of choosing yourself, is not coldness. It is not heartlessness. It is the most courageous and loving thing a person can do, for themselves and in ways they may never fully understand, for the avoidant too. Because the only love that ever truly helps a person grow is the love that refuses to enable their fear. The love that says, I see you, I understand you, and I love you enough to stop letting you use me as a place to hide. That is the love that changes people, not the love that stays no matter what. The love that finally, after everything, knows when to let go. The distance was never between the two of you. It was always between the avoidant and themselves. And when you stop carrying that distance for them, when you put it down and walk forward into your own life, you do not just break the cycle. You become proof that breaking it was possible all along. That is the final truth, and it is the one they will carry with them long after you have already moved on.